The cell door slammed shut before I even opened my eyes. My head throbbed. My wrists were bound in something cold and metallic, tighter than any handcuff I had ever felt on Earth. The air smelled wrong, sharp and chemical, nothing like the dust and pine of the outpost where I had been standing only minutes ago, checking a weather sensor on a quiet moon at the edge of human territory. Now I was somewhere else entirely. I am 67 years old. My name is Marcus Cole. 3 days ago, I was a retired engineer living a simple life, doing maintenance work for a small research station because retirement bored me more than the work ever did. Today, I was lying on a metal floor in a ship that did not belong to any species I recognized, and my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger. I forced myself to sit up. The room was small, gray, and lit by a pale blue light with no visible source. There was no window, no door handle, just smooth walls and a faint hum beneath my feet, the sound of engines carrying me somewhere far from home. I did not know it yet, but that hum was the sound of a war beginning. I tried to remember the last clear moment before everything went dark. I had been kneeling by the sensor array, tightening a bolt, when the light around me changed color, turning a deep violet. Then there was a pull, like gravity reversing, and then nothing. No pain, no warning, just an absence of time, and then this cell. Whoever had taken me knew exactly what they were doing. This was not an accident. This was not a rescue gone wrong. This was a capture, planned and precise. I stood slowly, testing my legs, testing the bindings on my wrists. They were tight, but not cruel, more like a tool designed to prevent movement than a device meant to cause pain. That told me something important. They wanted me alive. They wanted me functional. Whatever I was here for, it required me conscious and able to understand what was happening to me. I have spent much of my life around machines, engines, and systems that other people found too complicated to bother learning. It is a habit that never left me, even after the uniform came off and the deployments ended. So even scared, even confused, some part of my mind could not stop working. I studied the walls. I studied the light. I listened to the hum beneath my feet and tried to guess how fast we were moving and in which direction. After a while, a panel in the wall slid open without any sound at all. 2 figures stepped through. They were tall, taller than any man I had ever stood beside, with long limbs that moved a little too smoothly, like they were used to a lighter gravity than the ship currently held. Their skin had a faint gray sheen, and their eyes were large, dark, and strangely calm, the way a predator's eyes are calm right before it decides you are not a threat. Neither one spoke to me directly. They spoke to each other in a language that sounded like wind moving through metal pipes, quick and clipped. One of them held a small device toward me, and a moment later a voice came from it, flat and mechanical, translating their words into English. "Subject is stable. Proceed with transfer." "I have a name," I said. The 2 figures paused. It was clear they had not expected a response so calm. Perhaps they expected fear. Perhaps they expected pleading. I gave them neither, because pleading has never solved a single problem I have faced in my life, and I saw no reason to start now. "You will remain compliant," the device translated. "Resistance will not alter the outcome." "I didn't ask about outcomes," I said. "I asked why I'm here." They did not answer. Instead, they gestured for me to walk forward, out of the cell and into a corridor that curved gently, as if the entire ship had been built without a single straight line. The corridor lights pulsed softly as we walked, almost like a heartbeat, and I found myself counting the pulses out of habit, the same way I once counted footsteps on long marches, just to keep my mind steady. As we walked, I noticed something odd. Along the corridor were small alcoves, each containing strange devices, tools, and containers I did not recognize. But near one alcove, tucked half behind a support column, was a maintenance panel. Its edges did not quite match the rest of the wall. It was old technology, patched into something newer. I only saw it for a second, but a lifetime of fixing things does not let a detail like that pass unnoticed. Somewhere on this ship, something had broken before, and someone had repaired it in a hurry. Ships that got repaired in a hurry had weaknesses. Weaknesses could be found again. I said nothing, but I filed the thought away. We reached a wide chamber with a single seat in the center, bolted to the floor, facing a curved wall covered in shifting light patterns. One of the tall figures pressed my shoulder down until I sat, then fastened a thin restraint across my chest, not painful, but clearly meant to hold me in place. "You will remain here until scheduled appearance," the translator said. "Appearance where?" I asked. For the first time, one of them looked directly at me, its dark eyes studying my face, the way someone studies an old photograph, trying to understand what it once meant. "Before the council," it said, "you will represent your species." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, but the weight of understanding. I was not just a prisoner, I was evidence. I was about to be used as a symbol for something far bigger than myself, and I had no idea yet what conclusion they wanted the galaxy to draw from an ordinary, aging man sitting alone in a chair on an alien ship. They left the chamber, and the restraint held me quietly in place as the light patterns on the wall shifted into something new, a slow spinning shape like a map of stars I did not recognize. I sat there for a long time, alone with my thoughts, listening to the hum of engines and the occasional soft vibration that ran through the floor. I thought about my life, not with fear, but the way people do when they suddenly realize the story is not over yet. I thought about the years I had spent in uniform, long before I became an engineer, the training that never really leaves a person even decades later. I thought about the friends I had lost, the ones who never came home, and the strange, quiet promise I had made to myself back then, that if I ever faced something bigger than myself again, I would not shrink from it. I did not know yet what the Galactic Council was. I did not know how many worlds it represented, or how long it had existed, or what it thought of a species like mine, but I understood one simple truth already. Whoever had taken me believed I was harmless. They believed an old man in a chair was proof that humanity posed no danger to anyone. They were about to learn how wrong that belief could be. After some time, the chamber door slid open again, and a new figure entered, shorter than the others, wrapped in a deep red garment that seemed almost ceremonial. It studied me for a long moment without speaking, tilting its head slightly, the way someone examines an object they do not fully understand. "You do not appear as expected," it finally said through its own translator device, its voice smoother than the others, almost curious. "What were you expecting?" I asked. "Something less composed," it replied. "Your species is young, emotional, unstable, by most accounts we have gathered." "You gathered those accounts from watching us, or from fighting us?" I asked. The figure paused again, longer this time. "Observation only. Your kind has not yet been tested." "Then maybe you shouldn't assume what the test will show," I said quietly. It made a soft sound, almost like a short laugh, though I could not be sure that translation carried tone accurately. "You speak boldly for someone in restraints." "I've been in worse situations," I said, and meant it. The figure studied me a moment longer, then turned and left without another word, the door sliding shut behind it. I sat there in the silence that followed, feeling the ship shift slightly beneath me as it adjusted course. Whatever waited for me at the end of this journey, I understood now that it would not be simple and it would not be safe. But sitting there, bound to a chair on a ship built by people who considered me weak simply because of my age, I felt something steady settle over me, a calm I remembered from long ago, from a different life, a different uniform, a different kind of danger. I was afraid, yes. Only a fool would claim otherwise. But somewhere beneath that fear was something older and steadier, a quiet certainty that whatever the Galactic Council believed about humanity, they were about to receive an education they had not asked for and would not soon forget. The engines hummed beneath me, carrying me closer to a chamber full of strangers who thought they already understood what my species was capable of. They did not understand yet, but they would. The doors ahead of me were larger than any I had seen since waking up on that ship, tall enough to fit 3 of the gray figures standing on top of each other. When they opened, sound poured out first, a wave of overlapping voices, clicks, hums, and low tones that did not belong to any single language I could recognize. Then came the light, bright and white, spilling into the corridor like a held breath finally released. 2 guards walked me forward, one hand each pressed lightly against my shoulders, guiding me rather than dragging me. I kept my head level and my steps steady, refusing to let my legs betray the nervous energy building in my chest. Whatever waited beyond those doors, I decided in that moment that I would walk into it standing straight, not shuffling like a man already defeated. The chamber opened before me like an amphitheater carved from starlight. Rows of seating rose in circular tiers around a central floor, and every tier was filled with beings unlike any other, some tall and thin, some short and wide, some with skin like polished stone, others with limbs that moved in ways that made my eyes ache trying to follow them. Above the seating, screens floated in the air without any visible support, displaying images, symbols, and shifting light patterns that I assumed were some form of written language. At the center of the floor stood a raised platform, and on that platform I was led to a single spot marked with a circle of pale light. The guards released my shoulders and stepped back, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the room, surrounded on all sides by rows of alien eyes studying me. A low murmur rippled through the chamber as more of them noticed me. Some leaned forward. Some tilted their heads. A few of the delegates covered what I assumed were mouths, and I heard something that translated in fragments through the device, now clipped to my collar, whispers of curiosity, and more than once, quiet amusement. I stood still and let them look. I had faced inspections before, medical exams, military evaluations, moments where strangers studied me like a specimen on a table. This did not feel entirely different, only larger in scale and stranger in shape. A tone sounded through the chamber, sharp and clear, and the murmuring quieted. From an elevated seat near the top of the amphitheater, a single figure rose. It wore robes of deep silver that seemed to shift colors slightly, depending on the angle of the light, and its voice, when it spoke, carried without any visible microphone, filling the entire space with an even, formal tone. "Council members," it said, the translator device turning its words into clear English a heartbeat later. "Before you stands a representative example of the species known as humanity, recently acquired from an outer territory dispute. This specimen has been brought forward as evidence supporting today's discussion regarding containment policy for the human species." A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. Somewhere in the tiers, I heard something that sounded remarkably like laughter, quiet at first, then spreading. "Is this truly representative?" a voice called from one section, sharp and skeptical. "It appears frail, slow. Its movements suggest advanced age within its own biological framework." "Precisely the point," the silver-robed figure replied. "Observe closely. This is not a soldier. This is not a specialized combatant. This is an ordinary member of their society, and yet humanity continues to expand territory, resist diplomatic boundaries, and ignore established interstellar protocols. If their ordinary citizens appear this unthreatening, one must question why their expansion has drawn such concern among certain member worlds." More laughter followed, scattered but growing. I felt heat rise in my face, not from embarrassment, but from something sharper, something I recognized from long ago, the particular sting of being underestimated by people who had never once stood where I had stood. A different delegate leaned forward from a lower tier, its body covered in overlapping plates that shimmered faintly, like scales catching light. "Ask it to walk," it said, amusement clear even through the flat translation. "Let us see this fearsome threat move across the platform." The silver-robed figure gestured toward me. "Specimen, you may demonstrate basic mobility for the council's observation." I did not move. The chamber quieted slightly, confusion replacing some of the amusement. "I have a name," I said, my voice steady, carrying further than I expected in the wide open space. "It's Marcus. Marcus Cole. I'm not a specimen, and I didn't come here by choice, so I think I'll skip the demonstration." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the laughter returned, louder this time, rippling from tier to tier like a wave finding new energy. Somewhere above me, a delegate, covered in fine golden fur, clapped two of its four hands together in open delight. "It speaks with confidence," the scaled delegate said. "How charming! A relic pretending at defiance." "I am not pretending," I said. The silver-robed figure raised a hand, and the laughter slowly settled, though the amusement remained clear on many of the faces around me, whatever their equivalent of a smile might be. "Marcus Cole," it said, testing the syllables carefully, "you understand why you have been brought before this council?" "No," I said honestly. "Nobody's bothered to tell me anything since I woke up in a cell with my hands tied." "Then allow me to explain," the figure continued, its tone calm, almost gentle, the way someone might explain something to a child they did not expect to fully understand. "Humanity is young, barely a few centuries into meaningful space travel, and already your kind has clashed with 3 separate species along contested borders. Reports describe your people as aggressive, territorial, and unwilling to accept established diplomatic hierarchy." "Reports from who?" I asked. "The species we clashed with, or an unbiased source?" A ripple of surprise moved through parts of the chamber, quieter than the laughter before, but noticeable. The silver-robed figure paused, clearly not expecting the question turned back on it so directly. "The reports come from multiple confirmed incidents," it said carefully. "Your species has demonstrated a pattern of resistance when boundaries are imposed." "Boundaries imposed without discussion aren't boundaries," I said. "They're just orders. And people don't usually like being given orders by strangers who never asked what they needed first." More murmuring followed, some of it curious now rather than dismissive. The scaled delegate leaned back, clearly less amused than before, though its expression remained difficult for me to read clearly. "The council did not gather to debate philosophy with a captured specimen," another voice called out, sharper, colder than the rest. This one belonged to a tall, thin figure near the front row, its skin a deep shade of blue, its eyes narrow and calculating. "We gathered to determine whether humanity requires immediate containment before your expansion threatens established territories further. This specimen is simply meant to illustrate the ordinary nature of your people, proving that even your average citizen lacks the capacity for genuine strategic threat." "And what happens," I asked slowly, "if you decide we need containing?" The blue-skinned delegate studied me for a long moment before answering. "Restriction of expansion, monitored borders, limitations placed on your technological development until such time as your species demonstrates sufficient stability. And if we don't agree to that?" "Compliance will not be optional," it said simply. The chamber grew quiet again, waiting for my reaction. I felt the weight of every eye in that amphitheater resting on me, waiting to see if fear would finally show itself on my face, the way they clearly expected. I let the silence stretch a moment longer before I spoke again, keeping my voice level, calm, the way I had learned long ago to speak, even when everything inside me wanted to shout. "You brought an old man in front of this entire council," I said, "to prove a point about an entire species. You didn't bring a soldier. You didn't bring a leader. You grabbed someone doing maintenance work on a quiet outpost, and you decided that was enough evidence to judge billions of people you've barely spoken to." "The evidence speaks for itself," the silver-robed figure said, though its tone had shifted slightly, less certain than before. "Does it?" I asked, "because from where I'm standing, all your evidence proves is that you're comfortable judging an entire species based on one tired old man you grabbed without asking his name." A long pause followed. Somewhere in the upper tiers, I heard quiet whispering, voices exchanging words too fast for the translator to catch clearly. The golden-furred delegate who had laughed earlier now sat very still, watching me with an expression I could not quite place, something closer to curiosity than amusement. "You claim this assessment is unfair," the blue-skinned delegate said, "yet you offer no counter-evidence beyond words." "Words are what I have right now," I said. "But you should be careful about deciding a species is harmless just because one representative didn't come here angry, didn't come here shouting, and didn't start swinging the moment he woke up in a cell. Calm isn't the same as weak. Somebody should have told you that before you dragged me halfway across the galaxy to prove otherwise." The silver-robed figure studied me for a long moment, its expression unreadable, before finally speaking again, its voice carrying the same formal calm as before, though something beneath it had changed. "The Council will take a recess to consider these proceedings," it announced. "The specimen will remain present for further review." As the chamber began to stir, delegates leaning toward each other, whispering in dozens of overlapping languages, I stood alone on that raised platform, feeling the weight of every stare still resting on me. I had not shouted, I had not fought, but I had refused to shrink, and in a room full of strangers convinced my species posed no danger at all, that refusal alone seemed to unsettle them more than they were willing to admit. I did not know yet how quickly that unease would turn into something far more dangerous for all of us. But standing there, calm on the outside and steady on the inside, I understood one thing clearly. They had wanted proof that humanity was harmless. Instead, they were beginning to wonder if they had made a mistake. The recess did not last long. When the chamber lights shifted back to full brightness, the murmuring settled, and the delegates returned to their seats with an energy that felt different from before, sharper, more focused, as though something had been decided while I stood there waiting. The silver-robed figure rose again, its voice carrying that same formal calm across the wide amphitheater. "The Council has reached a preliminary judgment," it announced. "Given the demonstrated defiance of the specimen, even under captivity, several delegates have proposed an additional measure, a controlled demonstration, to settle any remaining doubt regarding humanity's physical and strategic limitations." A ripple of interest passed through the crowd, and I felt my stomach tighten. I had heard phrases like that before, dressed up in careful language, meant to sound reasonable while hiding something far less comfortable underneath. "What kind of demonstration?" I asked, keeping my voice level. The blue-skinned delegate from earlier stood, its narrow eyes gleaming with something close to satisfaction. "A simple trial," it said. "You will face a challenge suited to your species' physical capacity, observed by the full Council and broadcast to allied worlds currently monitoring these proceedings. Should you fail, as most delegates expect, it will serve as clear evidence supporting containment. Should you somehow succeed, it will at least demonstrate the boundaries of what a single human of your age and condition can accomplish." "And if I refuse?" I asked. "Refusal itself will be recorded as evidence," the silver-robed figure said smoothly. "A species too fearful to demonstrate its own claims of strength invites the same conclusion as one that fails outright." I understood the trap clearly enough. There was no path here that avoided being used as a symbol. The only choice left to me was what kind of symbol I intended to become. "Fine," I said, "let's see this demonstration." A section of the chamber floor began to shift, panels sliding apart with a low mechanical groan, revealing a wide circular arena beneath the platform where I stood. Lights flared to life around its edges, and across the arena floor, strange markings glowed faintly, forming patterns I did not recognize but assumed were meant to guide whatever challenge waited for me. Guards escorted me down a narrow ramp into the arena itself, removing the restraint from my chest but leaving my wrists loosely bound, a small mercy I did not trust for a second. The air down here felt heavier, thicker, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded me of old machine shops from decades ago. "The trial will test balance, endurance, and reaction," the translator device explained as a section of wall opened, revealing a mechanical structure unlike anything I had encountered, part obstacle course, part shifting maze, with panels that rose and fell unpredictably, some releasing bursts of pressurized air, others sliding sideways without warning. "You will cross from this point to the opposite marker," the silver-robed figure announced from above. "Time and completion will determine the outcome." I studied the arena carefully, ignoring the murmurs from the crowd above, ignoring the amused glances still lingering on several alien faces. My years of training had taught me one lesson above all others: panic solves nothing, but patience often reveals a way forward that fear alone would miss. The first section of the arena floor shifted upward without warning, forming a narrow raised path barely wide enough for both feet. I stepped onto it carefully, feeling the surface hum beneath me, unstable in a way that made my balance waver for a moment before steadying. I moved slowly, deliberately, refusing to rush despite the pressure of every watching eye above me. A section ahead released a sudden burst of air, strong enough to push me sideways if I had been standing carelessly. I had already shifted my weight low, bracing against the ramp's edge, letting the gust pass without knocking me off balance. Above me, I heard a few surprised murmurs ripple through the crowd, quieter than the confident laughter from before. The next section required crossing a gap where the floor had opened entirely, revealing a shimmering barrier of light beneath that I assumed was some form of safety net rather than an actual drop, though I did not test that assumption directly. A narrow beam extended slowly across the gap, and I crossed it carefully, arms extended for balance, moving with the same steady focus I once used walking narrow scaffolding decades ago during long nights of engineering work under far more mundane pressure. By the time I reached the halfway marker, sweat had gathered along my brow, and my legs ached with the effort of constant careful movement, but I had not fallen, and I had not hesitated longer than necessary. Above me, the murmuring had shifted entirely, no longer filled with easy amusement, but something closer to genuine surprise. The final section of the arena revealed itself as the most difficult, a series of moving platforms rotating slowly around a central point, each requiring precise timing to cross safely. I studied the pattern for a moment, counting the rotation speed the way I once counted the rhythm of machinery back home, searching for the gap that would let me pass safely. I found my opening and moved, timing each step carefully, refusing to rush despite every instinct urging speed. One platform shifted faster than expected, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, my foot slipped along its edge. I caught myself using nothing but core strength and stubborn will, refusing to let decades of aching joints decide the outcome of this moment. I reached the opposite marker just as the platform slowed to a stop, breathing hard, muscles trembling from the effort, but standing upright. Silence spread through the chamber above, heavier than before, the kind of silence that follows an outcome nobody quite expected. Somewhere near the front row, the blue-skinned delegates' narrow eyes had lost their earlier gleam of satisfaction, replaced instead with something closer to careful reassessment. "The trial is complete," the silver-robed figure announced finally, its voice carrying a note of surprise it did not fully manage to hide. "I told you," I said, still catching my breath. "Calm isn't the same as weak." A new voice rose from the upper tiers, calm and measured, belonging to a delegate I had not yet heard speak, its form tall and slender, covered in deep green markings that shifted slightly as it moved. "This proves only physical endurance," it said. "Strategic capacity remains unproven. Perhaps the specimen succeeded through simple stubbornness rather than genuine skill." "Then test something else," I said, looking directly toward the voice. "I'm not here to convince you I'm special. I'm here because you dragged me from my home and decided my age made me proof of something you clearly wanted to believe already." The green-marked delegate studied me for a long moment before responding. "Very well. A tactical simulation then. A scenario requiring decision-making under simulated pressure, judged by council observers." "Fine," I said, still breathing hard but standing straight. "Let's see it." The arena floor shifted again, this time forming a large display showing a complex simulated battlefield, unfamiliar terrain filled with strange structures and moving markers representing forces on both sides. A voice explained the scenario quickly: a defensive position under simulated assault, resources limited, time constrained, victory defined narrowly by successful containment of an advancing force without unnecessary losses. I studied the display carefully, ignoring the pressure of the watching crowd, focusing instead on patterns I recognized instinctively from decades spent around logistics, supply lines, and defensive strategy long before I ever became an engineer. The scenario was complex, but not unfamiliar in its underlying structure: resources versus terrain versus time, the same puzzle I had studied more times than I could count in a different life. I directed the simulated forces carefully, prioritizing defensible terrain over aggressive advancement, conserving resources rather than committing everything at once, adjusting positions as the simulated assault shifted its approach. Above me, I heard murmuring rise and fall as the scenario played out, uncertainty replacing the earlier confidence in many voices. When the simulation finally concluded, the display showing successful containment achieved with minimal simulated losses, silence spread through the chamber once more, heavier and longer than before. The specimen has demonstrated far greater capacity than initial assessment suggested, the silver-robed figure said slowly, its tone measured but no longer entirely confident. "I'm not a specimen," I said again, quieter this time, though the words carried clearly through the still chamber. "I told you my name already." The green-marked delegate studied me carefully, its expression difficult to read, but its posture noticeably different from before. Less dismissive, more cautious. "Your species presents an unusual pattern," it said slowly. "Calm under observation. Capable under pressure. Neither trait aligns with the assessment previously presented to this council." "Maybe your assessment was wrong," I said. "Maybe you should have asked questions before deciding an entire species deserved containment based on assumptions nobody bothered checking." A long pause followed, delegates exchanging quiet words across the tiers, expressions shifting from amusement to something closer to concern. The blue-skinned delegate, who had proposed the trial in the first place, now sat rigid, its narrow eyes studying me, with open calculation rather than earlier satisfaction. "The council requires further deliberation," the silver-robed figure finally announced, its voice carrying less certainty than before. "The specimen will be held for continued observation while further discussion proceeds." As guards approached to escort me back toward the platform, I felt something shift in the room around me, subtle but unmistakable. The laughter from earlier had vanished entirely, replaced by a tense, careful silence that told me more clearly than any words could that my calm refusal to be dismissed had done something they had not expected. They had wanted an easy conclusion. Instead, they were beginning to understand that a single old man, calm under pressure and steady despite captivity, might represent something far larger and far more dangerous than they had ever intended to provoke. Somewhere far beyond this chamber, I hoped desperately that my disappearance had already been noticed, that somewhere among the stars, people were already searching, already preparing, already understanding what these strangers had not yet realized themselves. I did not know it yet, but that hope was closer to reality than I dared imagine. The guards led me back to the small holding chamber, though this time they did not restrain me to the chair. Instead, they left me standing near the wall, watching me with something new in their posture, a caution that had not existed before the trials began. I noticed it immediately, the way their movements had grown slower, more deliberate, as if they were reconsidering every assumption they had carried into that first meeting. I sat down slowly, my legs aching from the arena, my mind racing through everything that had happened. I did not know how long the council would deliberate, but I understood one thing clearly: whatever they decided next would shape far more than my own fate. It would shape how they viewed my entire species, and that thought sat heavier on me than any physical exhaustion. Time passed strangely in that small chamber, without windows or clocks, only the faint hum of distant machinery to mark the minutes. I used the silence to think, running through everything I had noticed since waking on this ship: the patched maintenance panel in the corridor, the layout of the chamber, the timing of the guards' movements. Old habits, sharpened by decades of training, refused to stay quiet even now. Eventually, the door slid open again, and the golden-furred delegate from the chamber entered, moving with a calm, careful energy entirely different from the sharp tension of the guards. It studied me for a long moment before speaking, its voice softer than I expected, almost hesitant. "You handled the trials well," it said, "better than most delegates anticipated." "I didn't have much choice," I said. "There is always a choice," it replied. "Yours was simply to remain steady rather than yield to fear. Many species falter at that distinction." I studied the delegate carefully, unsure whether this was another test or something closer to genuine curiosity. "Why are you here?" I asked. "You didn't seem as eager to mock me as the others." "I did laugh," it admitted, something like embarrassment flickering across its expression. "I apologize for that. It was easier to laugh than to consider the possibility that our assumptions were incomplete. Most people find it easier to laugh at what they don't understand," I said. "Doesn't make it right." The delegate lowered its head slightly, an oddly humble gesture. The council did not expect resistance. Humanity's recorded history suggested rapid emotional escalation, aggressive posturing, quick violence. Your calm has unsettled many delegates, far more than any show of strength could have. "Maybe that's the point," I said. "We're not simple. None of us are. You can't judge an entire species by one clash at a border any more than you should judge us by one tired engineer standing in a chamber full of strangers." The delegate studied me a long moment before speaking again, its voice quieter now. "There is a faction within the council that fears humanity's expansion regardless of evidence presented today. They believe patience is not weakness, but strategy. They fear that your species observes carefully, adapts quickly, and endures far longer than expected before responding decisively." "That sounds like fear talking," I said, "not evidence." "Fear often masquerades as caution," the delegate agreed. "But fear, once it takes root among enough voices, becomes policy, regardless of its accuracy." A heavy silence settled between us. I thought about the calm strength my species had always carried quietly, the kind rarely visible until it was truly needed. I thought about how easily that calm could be mistaken for weakness by those who had never seen what waited beneath it. "What happens now?" I asked. "The council reconvenes shortly," the delegate said. "A final decision will be reached regarding containment policy. Your performance today has shifted opinion, but not eliminated the fear driving this discussion." Before I could respond, a sharp tone echoed through the chamber, followed by hurried movement outside the door. The golden-furred delegate stiffened, clearly alarmed by whatever the sound meant. Moments later, the door slid open again, and one of the tall gray guards entered, speaking rapidly in its own language, urgency clear in its tone, even without translation. The golden-furred delegate turned to me, its expression shifting from calm curiosity to something closer to concern. "Unidentified vessels have entered this system," it said slowly. "Multiple signatures, approaching at significant speed." My heart quickened, though I kept my expression steady. "What kind of vessels?" The delegate studied the guard's rapid words for a moment longer before answering. "Human," it said finally. "A significant human fleet has arrived without prior warning." I felt something settle inside me, a mixture of relief and quiet pride I had not expected to feel so strongly. Somewhere, somehow, my disappearance had been noticed, and my people had responded, not with panic, but with calculated, decisive action. "They're here for me," I said quietly. "Perhaps," the delegate replied, though its tone suggested uncertainty about what that arrival truly meant for everyone involved. The chamber door opened fully now, and guards moved quickly past us, clearly responding to new orders from elsewhere on the ship. I was left standing with the golden-furred delegate, watching the sudden shift in energy around us, tension rising sharply where calm curiosity had existed only moments before. "The Council will need to address this development immediately," the delegate said. "You should return to the main chamber." I followed without resistance, my mind racing through possibilities, uncertain exactly what awaited us, but understanding clearly that everything had changed the moment those unfamiliar signatures appeared on their scanners. When we reached the main chamber again, the atmosphere had transformed entirely. Delegates no longer sat calmly in their tiers, but stood in scattered groups, voices overlapping in urgent, rapid exchanges. The silver-robed figure stood near the central platform, its earlier formal calm replaced by visible tension as it addressed the crowd. "Order," it called out, and slowly, reluctantly, the chamber quieted. "We have confirmed reports of a substantial human fleet entering this system's outer boundary. Their intentions remain unclear, though their arrival coincides precisely with this specimen's captivity." "That is no coincidence," the blue-skinned delegate said sharply, its earlier confidence replaced by clear unease. "They track their own citizen, which means their technology and coordination exceed what this council previously assumed. Perhaps this confirms the necessity of containment," another voice called from the upper tiers, though it carried far less conviction than similar statements had earlier that day. I stood on the platform once more, watching the chamber shift from confident mockery into something closer to genuine concern, and I understood that the moment had arrived to speak plainly, without hesitation, without softening the truth any longer. "You wanted proof that humanity was harmless," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the tense silence. "Instead, you got proof that we notice when one of our own goes missing, and we don't wait around debating what to do about it." The silver-robed figure turned to face me fully, its expression difficult to read, but its posture rigid with tension. "What do your people intend?" it asked. "Speak plainly, specimen." "My name is Marcus," I said firmly. "And I think they intend exactly what any reasonable people would intend. They're here to bring me home, and to make sure nobody makes the mistake of thinking they could grab one of us without consequences." A long, uneasy silence spread through the chamber, delegates exchanging worried glances, the earlier laughter and mockery replaced entirely by something closer to dawning realization. I looked around slowly, meeting as many eyes as I could across that vast amphitheater, letting the weight of the moment settle fully before speaking the words I had promised myself I would say, if given the chance. "You had a choice today," I said. "You could have asked questions instead of assumptions. You could have judged us by more than a handful of border disputes and one tired old man dragged in front of a room full of strangers. Instead, you laughed, you mocked, and you decided we were harmless before you ever bothered understanding who we really are." I paused, letting the silence stretch, feeling the tension in the room grow heavier with every passing second. "If you want war," I said quietly, though my voice carried clearly through the still chamber, "you'll have it." Nobody laughed this time. The silence that followed felt different from every quiet moment before it. It was not confusion, and it was not simple surprise. It was the particular stillness of a room, slowly realizing it had made a terrible miscalculation, and had made it in front of every witness who mattered. The silver-robed figure recovered first, its voice carrying an edge I had not heard from it before, sharp with barely controlled tension. "Such a statement carries serious weight, specimen. Do you speak on behalf of your entire species, or merely your own frustration?" "I speak as someone who understands his people," I said, "and I'm telling you plainly, we don't go looking for conflict. We never have. But we don't back away from it either, not when someone decides to grab one of our own and parade him in front of strangers like evidence in a trial he never agreed to stand for." A new tone sounded through the chamber, sharp and urgent, and every delegate turned toward the floating screens above the central platform. The images shifted, revealing a live feed from somewhere outside the ship, a wide starfield with dozens of distant shapes moving steadily closer, formations precise and deliberate, nothing like the scattered arrival of a panicked rescue attempt. "They are broadcasting a message," one of the gray-skinned guards announced, its voice carrying through the chamber's translation system for the first time since I had arrived. "Audio only, no visual signature requested." The silver-robed figure hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Allow it." A new voice filled the chamber, calm, measured, and unmistakably human, carrying the kind of quiet authority I recognized instantly from years spent around command structures long before I ever became an engineer. "This is Fleet Commander Ellis Doyle, representing the United Defense Coalition of Earth and her colonies," the voice said. "We are aware that one of our citizens, Marcus Cole, was taken from Meridian Outpost 7 without provocation or consent. We are here to secure his safe return." The chamber stirred, delegates exchanging rapid, hushed words as the voice continued, steady and unhurried, without a trace of aggression, though the calm itself seemed to unsettle the room more than any shouted threat could have. "We understand misunderstandings occur between species still learning about one another," Commander Doyle continued. "We are prepared to resolve this peacefully, provided Marcus Cole is returned unharmed, and provided this council understands clearly that any future action against human citizens will be met with an appropriate and immediate response." The blue-skinned delegate rose sharply, its earlier confidence entirely gone, replaced now by visible alarm. "This is an act of aggression," it said. "A fleet arriving uninvited, issuing demands before diplomatic channels have even been properly established." "With respect," Commander Doyle's voice replied evenly, "your council abducted a retired engineer from a peaceful research outpost and paraded him in front of an assembly to prove a point about an entire species. I would suggest the aggression began well before our fleet arrived." I felt something close to relief settle over me at those words, though I kept my expression steady, refusing to let the emotion show too plainly in front of the watching delegates. Somewhere out there, among those distant shapes on the display, people I had never met had organized, mobilized, and arrived with exactly the kind of calm, deliberate resolve that no amount of mockery in this chamber could have anticipated. The silver-robed figure turned back to me slowly, its earlier formal composure now visibly strained. "You knew this would happen," it said. "You spoke with such certainty because you understood your people would respond." "I didn't know the details," I said honestly, "but I knew they would come. That's what we do. We don't leave our own behind, and we don't let strangers decide our worth without pushing back." A long pause followed, delegates across the tiers exchanging uncertain glances, clearly recalculating everything they had assumed about my species only hours earlier. The golden-furred delegate, who had spoken with me privately, now stood quietly near the edge of the platform, its expression carrying something close to quiet vindication, though it said nothing aloud. "What do you propose?" the silver-robed figure finally asked, addressing the open channel where Commander Doyle's voice still waited. "To resolve this situation without further escalation. Release Marcus Cole immediately," Commander Doyle replied. "Formally acknowledge the abduction as a violation of basic diplomatic conduct, and reconsider whatever containment policy brought your council to this decision in the first place, based on actual understanding of humanity rather than assumptions drawn from limited, isolated incidents." The chamber fell into hurried, whispered debate, delegates leaning toward one another across the tiers, voices overlapping in dozens of languages at once. I stood quietly at the center of it all, watching the shift unfold, understanding that whatever happened next would shape far more than my own fate. After several long minutes, the silver-robed figure raised a hand, and the chamber slowly quieted once more. "The council will grant the release of the specimen," it announced, then paused, correcting itself with visible effort. "The release of Marcus Cole, effective immediately. Formal acknowledgement of today's proceedings will be issued through appropriate diplomatic channels." A ripple of relief and lingering tension moved through the chamber in equal measure. Guards approached the platform, this time moving carefully, almost respectfully, gesturing for me to follow them toward a smaller side chamber, where, I assumed, arrangements were already being made for my transfer. Before I left the platform, I turned back one final time, looking out over the rows of alien faces still watching me, some with lingering suspicion, others with quiet, uncertain respect. "You wanted proof today," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the settling silence. "You got it. Not proof that we're harmless, and not proof that we're looking for a fight either. Just proof that you shouldn't mistake our patience for weakness, our calm for surrender, or our age for frailty. We notice when something is taken from us, and we respond, carefully, deliberately, and completely." Nobody answered, though I saw understanding settle over many of the faces watching me. Understanding that had not existed when I first stood in that chamber only hours before. I followed the guards through the corridor, my legs still aching from the trials, my mind still processing everything that had unfolded, and within a short time, I found myself standing in a small transfer bay where a single shuttle waited, its markings unmistakably human, simple and practical rather than decorated with any grand insignia. A young woman stepped down from the shuttle's open hatch, her uniform marked with the Coalition's modest emblem, her expression a careful mixture of relief and quiet professionalism. "Marcus Cole?" she asked. "That's me," I said, allowing myself a tired smile for the first time since waking in that cell. "I'm Lieutenant Mara Whitlock," she said. "Commander Doyle sent us to bring you home." "Appreciate it," I said, stepping toward the shuttle, feeling exhaustion settle over me, now that the immediate tension had finally eased. As the hatch closed behind us, and the shuttle lifted away from the massive alien vessel, I looked back through a small viewport, watching the ship shrink slowly into the surrounding darkness, surrounded by the quiet, disciplined formation of human vessels that had arrived to bring me home. I thought about everything that had happened, the mockery, the trials, the sudden shift from amusement to concern, as they realized exactly what kind of people they had chosen to underestimate. I thought about the quiet strength carried by ordinary people, the kind rarely visible until circumstances demanded it, and how easily that strength could be mistaken for weakness by those who had never truly tested it. The shuttle steadied as it aligned with the larger fleet waiting beyond, and Lieutenant Whitlock glanced toward me with quiet curiosity. "What happened in there?" she asked. Command received strange reports, mockery, some kind of trial, and then a sudden shift in tone before we made contact. I considered the question for a long moment before answering, choosing my words carefully, the way I always had, even decades after leaving my old uniform behind. "They wanted proof we were harmless," I said finally. "So I gave them something else instead." "What was that?" she asked. I looked out at the quiet formation of ships surrounding us, steady and disciplined, ready without needing to prove anything further, and allowed myself a small, tired smile. "Proof that we notice," I said, "and proof that when someone decides to test us, we don't back down, no matter how old, how tired, or how ordinary we might look standing alone in a room full of strangers." The shuttle continued forward, carrying me steadily back toward the fleet, back toward home, leaving behind a council that had learned, far more quickly than they expected, exactly what kind of people they had chosen to mock. They had wanted an old man to prove humanity was weak. Instead, across 100 worlds and 1,000 quiet conversations that would follow in the months ahead, they would come to understand a far different truth, one they would not soon forget. Humanity was calm, patient, and slow to anger, but once provoked, humanity did not stop until the matter was settled completely, and everyone involved understood clearly that it would never happen again.